Imagine walking into your local bank branch. You push through those heavy glass doors, you take a little ticket, you wait in line, and eventually you sit down at a desk and you hand over this stack of highly sensitive documents. I mean, your ID, your proof of address, maybe years of your financial history. You just slide it all across the desk, the teller scans it into their system, you walk out. But as you walk to your car, a thought creeps in. Who is actually keeping that information safe right now? Where did it just go? Welcome to this deep dive. Because that exact question, where your data goes and who actually controls it, is the reason the entire banking industry is currently in a state of sheer panic. We are looking at this dispatch from Vijay Shankar Nah, written on July 2026. And the main takeaway is that banks are just completely unprepared for a massive impending shift in how they handle your personal information.
Yeah, it is a monumental shift. And the pressure here is entirely driven by the calendar. We are looking at a very real, very unforgiving ticking clock.
We're talking about a 314-day countdown. There are exactly 314 days until May 13th, 2027. That is the date the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023, the DPDPA, goes into full unmitigated effect.
Right.
The grace period is ending, the training wheels are coming off, and we are going to give you, the listener, a behind-the-scenes look at an industry that is frankly terrified of what happens when that clock strikes zero.
Because on May 13th, 2027, the enforcement mechanisms drop, and banks are going to face immediate inquiries from the newly empowered Data Protection Board, the DPB.
And these aren't just normal audits.
These DPB inquiries aren't just going to be random routine audits from bureaucrats. They are going to be driven directly by customer grievances.
Meaning from you, the listener.
The power dynamic is flipping entirely overnight.
The brief specifically outlines 3 types of grievances that are going to trigger these board inquiries. It says data access, data deletion, and processing without permission. I want to ground this in reality for the listener. If someone is listening to this right now, what do these 3 specific rights mean for them on a practical, everyday level? Because it sounds like basic customer service, but the panic implies it's much bigger than that.
What's fascinating here is that giving you, the individual, the power to demand data access or data deletion fundamentally breaks the traditional banking model. Well, think about how banks have operated for literally centuries. They are institutions built on the concept of hoarding data. Exactly. They believe that more data means better risk assessment, better loan profiling, better targeted marketing. Their entire infrastructure is specifically designed to collect information and keep it forever. Now, suddenly, you have a statutory right to walk into that branch and say, show me exactly what you have on me everywhere in your entire system.
And that's the data access grievance.
Or, far more disruptively, you can demand erase every single trace of what you have on me, and that is data deletion.
Let me just make sure I'm wrapping my head around the scale of this. If I ask for data deletion, the bank can't just delete my recent checking account statements.
No.
They have to find every single data point they've ever collected on me across their entire sprawling corporate network and permanently destroy it.
Every single piece. And the third grievance, processing without permission, means they cannot even use the data they already hold unless they can unequivocally prove that you explicitly gave them permission to use it for that exact specific purpose.
So no more fine print loopholes.
Right. A bank is no longer a one-way vault where your data goes in and never comes out. You now hold the keys to your specific digital safety deposit box. If a bank cannot instantly locate your data, show it to you, or delete it permanently upon your request, they are in direct violation of the DPDPA. And that is when the Data Protection Board comes knocking with an inquiry.
But I'm stuck on this geography problem mentioned in the source. The brief identifies this massive architectural flaw in modern banking. It points out that personal data is collected at hundreds of local branches, it sits in a central server, but the data protection officer, the DPO, the person legally responsible for making sure the bank complies with the new law, is stationed at the head office. Now, normally in tech, centralization is the holy grail, right? You lock everything in one central server, put a heavy digital padlock on it, and you're safe. So why is having a central DPO and a central server suddenly a massive liability here?
Because the vulnerability isn't the central server itself. A central server can be hardened, it can be encrypted, it can be secured by the best IT teams in the world. The true vulnerability is the collection point.
So the branches?
It's the geography, exactly as you said. Think about the physical distance in the disconnect.
It feels a bit like a massive restaurant chain. Like you want the raw ingredients stored in a centralized, highly secure, temperature-controlled warehouse.
Right.
But the problem here is that the health inspector, which in this scenario is the DPO, is sitting in a corporate office hundreds of miles away in a major city.
Yes, exactly.
Meanwhile, the actual food handling, the chopping, the cooking, the physical data collection is happening in hundreds of separate branch kitchens simultaneously without any direct oversight.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it because the DPO sitting at headquarters in Mumbai or Delhi cannot possibly monitor the physical and digital data collection processes happening every single minute across hundreds of widespread rural and suburban branches.
Which is just impossible.
When you hand your physical documents to a teller, what happens in that crucial 5-minute window before it hits the secure central server? Right. Did that local employee leave the scan of your ID open on their desktop? Did they use an unapproved local flash drive to transfer the file because the network was slow that day? Did they ask for a piece of information they didn't actually need for your transaction, thereby violating the processing without permission rule before the data even leaves the building?
And the DPO is completely blind to all of this. The DPO has absolutely no line of sight into those branch level activities. Yet under the DPDPA, they're the one who has to answer to the Data Protection Board when a customer files a grievance. The localized collection creates this massive blind spot for the centralized compliance officer.
So the human element is a nightmare. But even if that DPO could magically watch every human teller in every local branch, they are still completely blind to the next layer of the bank, which is the machines. The briefing points out that we have to factor in the increasing use of data processors and artificial intelligence in banking, and this just takes the complexity and multiplies it. It takes a structural problem and turns it into an existential one for the bank's compliance team. Banks are not closed loops anymore.
Right, because when you give your data to a bank, it doesn't just stay quietly in their central server. The bank is constantly feeding your financial information into complex algorithms and shipping it off to external third-party data processors to handle things like credit scoring, fraud detection, or even just routing it through external cloud storage providers.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how introducing AI and external data processors turns the new privacy mandates into an absolute logistical nightmare. Let's look at the processing without permission risk. An AI model thrives on massive data sets to learn patterns.
It needs all that data to get smart.
Exactly. So if a bank feeds your data into an external AI to train a new credit scoring algorithm, did you explicitly give permission for your data to be used as training material for a machine learning model?
Most likely not.
Exactly. And what happens when a customer pulls the ripcord and asks for the data deletion grievance?
I submit a formal request to my bank to delete my personal data.
You do. And the bank goes into their central server and hits delete. But what if they already sent your spending habits to an external AI processor weeks ago? That is the million-dollar question. Is your data still lingering in that third-party AI model's training data?
How do you even get it out?
You really can't easily. Once data is ingested by a neural network, extracting it is incredibly complex. How does the isolated DPO sitting at headquarters guarantee that an external data processing company has completely purged your specific information from their black box algorithms?
They just can't.
Tracking one individual's data through a web of external processors and AI systems to execute a clean total deletion is like trying to remove a single drop of dye after it's been stirred into a glass of water.
And if they miss even a single trace of your data in one of those external AI models, they are in violation of the DPDPA.
Exactly.
The 314-day clock is ticking, and the DPB is just waiting for that grievance. But honestly, as if managing hundreds of rogue branch locations and opaque AI models wasn't hard enough, we get to the part of the brief that really blew my mind.
The regulation.
The regulatory spiderweb. Because banks are basically trapped. The new Data Protection Act is just one of many masters they have to serve, and their demands are completely contradictory.
This is where the true scale of the compliance crisis becomes apparent. Banks do not exist in a vacuum where the new privacy law is the only rule they have to follow. They are heavily regulated entities, and those existing regulations are actively colliding with the new one.
The briefing lists this massive overlap of competing frameworks. We're talking about the RTI Act, the POSH Act, RBI regulations, and Section 70 of the Information Technology Act of 2000. And banks have hundreds of processes covering multiple products, savings accounts, loans, credit cards, and they somehow have to comply with all these laws simultaneously. Let's break down the mechanics of these inherent contradictions. Let's start with the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI. The brief notes the RBI has its own regulations on data retention.
The DPDPA gives you, the customer, the absolute right to demand data deletion. You tell the bank, erase my entire financial history from your systems.
Okay, so the privacy law says delete it.
But the RBI, the central banking authority, mandates incredibly strict data retention rules for all financial institutions. Yes, this is primarily to prevent money laundering, track financial fraud, and maintain economic stability. The RBI says you must keep this customer's transactional data for 7 years no matter what, no matter what.
So the bank is caught in a literal trap. If they follow the privacy law and delete your data, they violate RBI regulations and face massive penalties from the central bank. But if they follow the RBI and keep your data, they violate the new privacy law and face an inquiry from the Data Protection Board.
You've got it.
How is a bank supposed to legally exist if the laws themselves are in total contradiction?
That is exactly what is keeping these DPOs awake at night. And I mean, it doesn't stop at the RBI. Consider the RTI Act, the Right to Information Act. The core philosophy of RTI is institutional transparency. It empowers citizens to demand information from organizations to ensure accountability.
But the core philosophy of the DPDPA is privacy and concealing information.
Exactly.
So how does a bank juggle a legal request to reveal data under the Right to Information Act while simultaneously being legally mandated to protect and conceal that exact same data under the Privacy Act?
They conflict at a philosophical and operational level. It's a paradox. And then you have to factor in laws that you wouldn't immediately associate with banking data, like the POSH Act.
I saw POSH on that list, the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act. How on earth does a workplace safety law clash with a customer data privacy law?
Because under the new privacy law, employees are also data principals. Right. Employees have rights over their personal data too. Now, compliance with the POSH Act often requires an organization to collect and maintain highly sensitive personal incident reports regarding harassment claims. This data is absolutely critical for workplace safety and legal liability. But what happens if an employee involved in one of these incidents leaves the bank and demands data deletion under the privacy law? The bank is mandated by the privacy law to erase the employee's personal data, but they are mandated by the POSH Act to retain those sensitive incident reports for legal compliance.
Every single one of these laws pulls the bank in a totally different direction. And then the briefing brings up Section 70 of the Information Technology Act of 2000, or ITA 2000. It says many banks have been notified under this section, which introduces separate obligations of information security. What does that actually mean mechanically?
Being notified under Section 70 of the ITA 2000 essentially designates a bank's core computer systems as protected systems, or critical information infrastructure. Exactly. It's a matter of national security. It introduces incredibly stringent, lockdown-level information security obligations. The goal is to build massive digital walls around the data to keep unauthorized actors out.
The privacy law requires the bank to easily access that data and provide it to the customer on demand, or delete it entirely on demand. If the ITA 2000 mandates locking the system down so tightly that arbitrary access is nearly impossible, doesn't that conflict with the privacy mandate of accessibility?
Exactly. The IT Act wants the data locked in a fortress, while the Privacy Act wants the data to be highly fluid and accessible to the individual.
That's a mess.
Fulfilling a rapid data access request under the privacy law might require bypassing the stringent security protocols mandated by the IT Act, potentially flagging as a critical security breach.
Let me just try to put myself in the shoes of the DPO sitting at headquarters. I'm sitting at my desk in Mumbai. I am responsible for hundreds of distinct business processes across the bank. For every single one of those processes, I have to figure out how to honor a deletion request under the Privacy Act without violating the retention mandate from the RBI. I have to maintain lockdown information security protocols under the IT Act while still allowing data fluidity. I have to manage institutional transparency under the Right to Information Act and protect workplace safety data under the POSH Act.
It's dizzying.
And I have to guarantee all of this contradictory compliance is happening flawlessly across hundreds of remote rural branch kitchens and within opaque third-party AI models.
All at once.
All while a 314-day countdown ticks away in the background.
And if you fail at any single point in that massive contradictory web, the Data Protection Board receives a customer grievance and initiates an inquiry.
It sounds mathematically impossible. I mean, with compliance looking basically unattainable before that May 13th, 2027 deadline, The banking industry clearly needs a lifeline.
Desperately.
And according to the brief, the FDPPI is trying to throw them one.
The FDPPI, the Foundation of Data Protection Professionals in India, is actively developing specific compliance frameworks to provide assistance. This initiative falls under the umbrella of DGPSI, which stands for the Data Governance and Protection Standard of India.
Okay, so DGPSI. The brief mentions two variants here. It notes that DGPFI hospitals is already out for public discussion, and DGPSI-Banks is currently in development. The goal is to help banks make substantial progress before the deadline, but I have to push back here. How does a private industry-specific framework like DGPSI-Banks actually solve legal contradiction? Like, if the law says delete it and the other law says keep it, an acronym like DGPSI doesn't magically change the law, right? So how does it help?
Well, you're right. It doesn't change the law, but it acts as a desperately needed translation layer and a unified playbook. Think about why the DGPSI hospitals framework is already in public discussion. Hospitals face a very similar nightmare. They are balancing strict patient privacy with intense medical retention laws.
They have to keep medical records for years.
Exactly. An industry-specific framework maps out the exact intersections of these conflicts. For banks, DGPSI-Banks will theoretically take every single one of those hundreds of complex banking processes and provide a standardized route through the maze.
So what does this all mean? It basically creates a rule book for how to handle the contradictions legally.
Precisely. It would provide the exact vetted protocol for what a bank should do when a privacy deletion right clashes with an RBI retention rule.
Oh, that makes sense.
It might detail how to securely partition the data so it satisfies the central bank's retention mandate in a locked vault, while simultaneously removing it from all active user-facing systems to satisfy the privacy deletion mandate.
So the bank isn't just flying blind and making up their own individual strategy to handle the conflict.
Right. It also establishes the standardized audit trails needed to bridge the geographical gap we discussed earlier.
The branches versus headquarters.
Exactly. It provides the central DPO with the exact blueprint required to monitor the data collection happening at the local branch level. By adopting a unified standard like DGPSI-Banks, these institutions aren't individually guessing how to comply with the Privacy Act, RTI, POSH, and the IT Act all at once.
That'd be chaos.
When the Data Protection Board inevitably starts their inquiries triggered by customer grievances, a bank using this framework has a defensible, standardized, thoroughly mapped approach to show they are managing the contradictions responsibly.
So it's basically giving that isolated DPO at headquarters the centralized blueprint they desperately need to monitor those hundreds of local branch kitchens, while also giving them a legal shield to explain why they didn't delete data the RBI told them to keep.
That's exactly it.
So let's bring this all together. We are exactly 314 days away from May 13th, 2027. On that day, the grace period ends, the new privacy law goes live, and you, the listener, get the immense power to demand your data be accessed, demand it be deleted, or demand proof that it hasn't been processed without your explicit permission.
It's a huge shift in power.
But standing in the way of those straightforward rights is a massive, crumbling structural challenge. Banks are collecting your highly sensitive data at hundreds of far-flung localized branches, beaming it to a central server, and relying on a single isolated DPO at headquarters to somehow keep an eye on all of it.
A nearly impossible task.
And then you add in the wild card of external AI processors acting like dye in a glass of water, and a tangled, highly contradictory web of RBI retention rules, right to information transparency laws, POSH workplace rules, and IT Act security mandates.
It's a perfect storm.
You literally have an entire global industry teetering on the brink of a compliance crisis. The only lifeline right now is the hope that the DGPSI-Banks framework can map out and untangle the mess before the clock runs out next May.
Which brings us to the ultimate implication of this entire briefing. We know the rules are incredibly complex, contradictory, and overlapping, and we know the physical and digital systems collecting the data are heavily fragmented. This raises an important question.
What's the question we should be asking?
If the DPO is isolated at headquarters, and a third-party AI processor unlawfully processes data that was originally collected improperly by a human teller at a local rural branch under all these overlapping contradictory laws, who actually takes the blame? Is the legal liability going to fall on the local branch manager who originally collected the data? Will it fall on the isolated DPO who was entirely blind to the localized collection? Or will the blame shift to the external AI processor who ultimately misused it?
That's a mess.
Will frameworks like DGPSI actually succeed in protecting your personal information? Or are they just going to create a highly complex, standardized blame game where every department points the finger at a different conflicting regulation?
That is a chilling thought. And it is exactly what you should be wondering the next time you walk through those heavy glass doors of your local branch and slide your personal documents across the desk.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep a very close eye on how your own bank adapts to this structural nightmare because that May 13th deadline is rushing toward us. We'll be here to unpack it all as the frameworks take shape.